Now,
How do science and religion connect? Have we found sci-fi's space Jesus? Is Star Trek more agnostic or atheist? We're going to attempt to answer these questions and more on this episode of Systematic Geekology, where we are the priests to the geeks. Today, we'll be discussing religion and Deep Space Nine. I want to introduce our illustrious hosts today, Christian Ashley, Herbie Ramsey, Matthew Winter, and myself. They call me the mostly Reverend Justin Coleman. I first want to ask you guys, so what have you been geeking out on lately?
man, first episode of The Penguin. I had a lot of fun with that one.
I've been watching the Lord of the Rings, the thing on Amazon. I forget the name of it off the top of my head.
Rings of Power.
Rings of Power, yes. That's been pretty good.
Yeah.
Nothing new for me. Same old stuff. There's a lot about to come out that I'm really excited to geek out on, and just a few weeks away.
Of the things that are about to come out, what are you looking forward to most?
Let's see. So there's a new Gundam series dropping on Netflix. That is going to be Requiem of Vengeance, I believe is the title. And it's from Zeon perspective. So it flips it. Instead of seeing the Gundam as the Great White Hope, Gundam is the White Devil. And so we really get to see that perspective. So that'll be fun. The new Zelda game either just dropped or is about to, Echoes of Wisdom. So I'll be playing that soon. And then we're a couple weeks away from Dragon Ball Daima.
Yeah, man, all good stuff. Well, I'm kind of like Herbie. I am enjoying the Rings of Power very much. The second season is out now. I am enjoying the second season more than the first. They've got a narrow band of the property that they can actually talk about and expand. And I think this second season has a lot of really fun content thus far. Well, audience, we thank you for your dedicated support of us. We ask that you please rate and review us on Podchaser, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find us. We would appreciate that rating. And also, we thank you always to our dedicated listeners and supporters. All right, now let's get to the meat of things. Today, our topic is religion and Deep Space Nine. All right, fellas, tell me what brings you to this conversation. What excites you about this conversation today?
And there's many things I love about DS9. This is my favorite Trek. I love to see a deconstruction of some of the values that Roddenberry was bringing in, of showing how a society could actually be, kind of post-scarcity in certain respects. I love to see what happens, on the frontier of space, and like the religious conflict that comes up in, Bajor and Cisco being the emissary as this foreign man who has never been to this side of the galaxy before, and yet now he's got to be this religious leader as also a Starfleet officer. Then, of course, the entire Dominion War, like, give me those battles, every single one of them. I love this series.
I will say one of my favorite parts about Deep Space Nine is how they basically did an about face and how they treated religion in The Next Generation. And instead of it being this thing that has to be shunned, that we can't interact with the pre-warp cultures because they might think we're a god, we're just going to accept the theology here. We're going to accept the fact that they worship these creatures of the wormhole.
For the most part, when it comes to systematic geekology, man, if I see Star Trek anything on the schedule, I'm signing up for that. I know it's something we've done in the past, and I kind of signed myself up for it, so we're doing it again. And so I am just excited to be here and discuss, same as Christian, my favorite Star Trek show. Even though it does, as Herbie pointed out, kind of fly in the face a little bit of kind of what Star Trek had been doing previously. And Christian pointed out, it kind of does an about face on Roddenberry's atheist utopia. But yeah, and it's all the better for it.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of like you. I love anything that is Star Trek. However, I've said to some before that Deep Space Nine is the Star Trek. Deep Space Nine and perhaps Enterprise are the Star Trek properties that I spent the least amount of time on. I kind of came up in a Star Trek The Next Generation world. That was Star Trek to me. But I, like you all, wrestled with this sense of Roddenberryan atheism, this idea of Q, for instance, being a god in quotation marks that was one to be mocked. And so in this idea that in an enlightened society, you have moved, this is one of the things that you have moved beyond. I always wrestled with that in Star Trek The Next Generation. And so, yes, Deep Space Nine has more of it. So let's do a little bit of background here. So we've kind of indicated this before, but Gene Roddenberry really wanted a Star Trek galaxy that moved beyond religion. And see Star Trek 5 for more information. We've got a whole movie where religion is mocked in a kind of way.
Or don't see Star Trek 5. That's fine too.
Or not. Take our word for it.
Are you saying Star Trek 1 was better?
So Star Trek 1 and 5 are both beautiful movies. They look fantastic. My praise ends there.
Way to say something positive. That's good. That's good.
No, Star Trek 5 established a precedent that we can just show a sibling of Spock whenever we want to. And of course, that's never been proven to be a bad thing in the future of Star Trek.
This is true. It just keeps going. Spock seems to not care about any of Spock's siblings until they show up. So very, very Vulcan, I guess. All right. So moving past Star Trek 5. So DS9 was one, as we've said, that portrayed religion. In fact, it's a big part of the story. Mm-hmm. We might even say that the story couldn't hold together if religion was not part of Deep Space Nine. Mm-hmm. You know, Deep Space Nine at the time came out where you've got The Next Generation, you've got Voyager. It was so different. It wasn't spaceship led. You had this widowed father rather than the single captain. You had lots of civilians. You had several non-Starfleet personnel, and it also introduced religion. Star Trek had been political before, right? We have a lot of political commentary in Star Trek, but DS9 has this kind of gritty political conversation that is serialized rather than episodic. You actually have to walk through these political situations across many episodes in DS9. But let's talk a little bit more about this idea of faith in DS9. So how do you think DS9 shows how faith in science can coexist in the Star Trek universe without violating Roddenberry's general vision for Star Trek?
I mean, I'd argue ultimately it does kind of violate it to an extent. In that Roddenberry, without the man, we wouldn't have Star Trek. Some of his points and beliefs, I couldn't care less about. I'd rather they weren't on screen. But I mean, like we mentioned earlier, the difference between TNG and DS9, it's like night and day at certain points in time with how religion is portrayed specifically. And we have this in the faith and science are ultimately a part of our own world. So obviously I want to see that portrayed in the sci-fi series well, especially as we advance further in the future. And what they do is excellent in that you have Cisco, who suffered immensely at the Battle of Wolf 359, and is just trying to find a quiet place to settle down, raise his kid, and not be bothered by anything. And yet he comes there. There's a wormhole.
Well,
The Cardassians are trying to come back. And oh, by the way, now I am going to be the emissary of this entire people group who aren't even members of the Federation. So, what do I do with that? And the entire point of like, okay, are the prophets real? Are they just highly advanced aliens? Because those exist all throughout Star Trek. You have your Organians and beyond. So, are they just like them? Are they actually gods of some sort? Of then you ask those questions, you have to wrestle with it. And I think one thing that Roddenberry did do well is he wrestled with those concepts. So we have like, your Metrons show up, or you have Apollo show up, and like, okay, what does that mean if these things are real? And DS9 does an excellent job, not only with the Bajoran side of things, but like we were talking before recording, we've got the Ferengi belief and the whole, divine treasury, and how that reconciles in a society built on greed. And then the Klingons, as Matthew mentioned before recording, in the backstory, murdered their own gods so that they could essentially become atheists to an extent. Kind of violent Buddhists, maybe, if you want to put it that way. So, but it's done so not to say, oh, religion's dumb, religion is stupid. Like, hey, here's how these different cultures are asking the same questions we are. What can we learn from these things that don't exist but actually interact with our own world?
And to build upon that, Bajor having just gotten their independence back from the Cardassians, they centered around their religion. It helped them stay together as a people. It helped them rebuild their culture. You mentioned the Klingons and how they had killed off their gods. Well, they still believed that Kahless was going to return one day. And they brought back Kahless in a really weird way for them, having him be a clone of the original Kahless. But they showed very well in Deep Space Nine that religion has very, very strong, good socio impact on society. Like, it's really good for society. It helps us come together when we have this common belief.
Well, and I think the character of Cisco embodies this, I guess, for lack of a better term, this cognitive dissonance, right, of science and religion. Because on the one hand, as a man of science, as a Starfleet officer, he knows that at the end of the day, at least for him, the prophets are merely wormhole aliens. And yet, as the emissary, he has communed with them and spoke with them, and whether they are gods or not, they act as such to the Bajoran people. So then we have to ask, then what makes something or some things gods? Is it merely the worship of them as deity? Or is there an intrinsic quality that makes something a god or godlike?
No, they're only god if they need a spaceship.
Oh man, you're just gonna keep on cutting.
and Roddenberry only believes it's a god if it can be killed.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I mean, even the Q could be killed.
Exactly.
But the Q never showed up after he got punched in the face.
That's really, really interesting.
The card never punched him.
Really interesting the way Roddenberry viewed that, and I agree with you all. I mean, DS9 really does push past that, and we're left to ask these questions about: is it this notion that everything is magic until we can figure it out, and then it becomes science, right? And that is the tension that we continue to hold, even through to the end of DS9. But we've mentioned the Bajorans many times, so let's talk a little bit about the Bajorans and their spirituality. We've got characters in DS9 who show both the upside of religion and the challenges of religion. Yeah. Particularly, we think about these characters of Major Kira and Kai Wynn Adami, who Kira, we see bringing out some of the, we see religion bringing out some of the best in her. Mm-hmm. And then when Adami, we see religion bringing out some of the worst in her. So how would you describe and characterize the religious motivations and postures of these two characters in particular?
I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt. Go ahead, Matthew. I've spoken first all the time, so you go ahead.
Okay. So that's another thing DS9 does really well, and I really appreciate its characterization of faith and of religion. So often in these types of shows, when we do get religion presented, it's just negative, right? Right. Everyone would be like Gwen. They would just be this power hungry, power as religion. I'm doing the will of God, but not really. This is what I want. kind of portrayal. But then that is juxtaposed with the faith of the everyday Bajoran. That is this true, trusting belief. Maybe not in their Kais, but in the prophets themselves.
I will say I never cared much for Kai Wynn. She did show the danger that happens when religion has a major power over the people. She worked her way up politically. She even expressed at points that she had never heard directly from the prophets. She had never heard their voice. And yet here she is leading the people as the spokesperson until the emissary is revealed that she's the head of the religion. And she only got there from politics. She has no real direction from the people they're worshiping.
Right. And with both of them, I mean, they both participated in the resistance against Cardassians in different ways, utilizing religion as part of that. Like, Kira is a true believer. She is someone who follows the will of the prophet. She wants to live up to their standards, but at the same time struggling with what she did as a resistance fighter. I mean, well, they call themselves terrorists, but that's a little before the terrorists really became the bad word it is in American culture. That's one thing that they also had to struggle with, the different timelines of, like, it's obviously pre 9/11 with discussion of that. But she's bombed people. Civilians have died as a result of her beliefs, as well as her desire to get the Cardassians out of there, and how to mix the two. Like, and her moving over, starting to learn how to love the people who actually murdered her people is a huge part of her growth too, as she has to teach them how to become rebels and guerrilla fighters later on when the Dominion takes control of Cardassia. And then you get to Kai Wynn, who, with Kai Opaka before her, was like the example of the good shepherd. She's the one who worked as hard. Yeah, Wynn was also part of the resistance. She didn't actively fight, but she was making sure as much as possible, under very terrible circumstances, to try and keep people alive. She lost a son, if I remember correctly, who died in the resistance. But you have Kai Opaka here, who is, like I said, that good shepherd trying to watch over the people. And then unfortunately she dies in a very throwaway episode on another planet. So Kai Wynn could come to power. And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't she the one where Keiko is teaching evolution? Yes, okay. And they have the religious strife there, the faith and science, which is a huge part of her character. And I would argue in that episode, she's a little not Flanderized. She takes the side that obviously the writers are against, and that gets a little too bad, a little not good enough. It's like opposing two side views, but it's because of her fundamentalism versus her actually putting any of the time and effort into understanding what's going on that makes things worse. And it's because of her own pride, which she never loses, even when she redeems herself at the very end by moving Gul Dukat away. She's still doing it out of self-interest.
You know, when I look at this, and I think Herbie said it, it is about what happens when religion has power. You said power of the people. I think it's, I just kind of would say it's what happens when religion has power. So this is thinking in Christian history. This is religion post the Constantinian settlement. Religion post Constantine. All of a sudden, we've got power to wield. We've got armies to wield. And then we move forward when we think about things like the Crusades. Well, there were some people who must have gone into that thinking, I am going to do a holy duty. I've been conscripted to do a holy duty. And I believe that my actions are that of a true believer. And so this is some of the tension of the warrior. What I love seeing in Kira is this sense of moving into the vastness of God, and so you see this journey of spiritual growth that Kira has been on across her life that looks very different than the nationalism, spiritual nationalism that is present in some of the harmful ways of Kai Wen and those who affiliate. These are things that we can talk about it even in our context here. But what an interesting tension between these two characters. What other similarities do you see between that and, say, American Christianity? If we can dabble in that for a moment.
I mean, you've got the regular believer out there they're not seeking power for themselves. They're attempting to commune with God as God has directed them, and whether it be through working through the church or elsewhere, they're just attempting to do what they're supposed to do. And you like to think, yeah, that's what we're all working on together alongside each other. The church may not be unified denominationally, but surely we all follow Jesus and everything Jesus spoke of. And then you have people like Kai Wen on all sides of the spectrum who will use religion as a way to justify, well, I need to take power so I can keep these things from being made passed into a law, or I can make these laws instead to prohibit these things I don't like, even though, yeah, you may have some justification in scripture, but as far as that's for people, not exactly a government. And I forgot where I was going to go, so take away from me.
All right, I'll take away.
I'm all over my Alzheimer's.
I'm going to bring the attention a little bit here to Cisco.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of Christians out there that are somewhat like Cisco at the start. And they start off, they're rather antagonistic, and then they reluctantly accept. And over the time, they finally come to realize they have to fully submit. He does eventually have to fully submit to what it means to be the emissary. Not only like in actions, but he genuinely comes around to what his role is as the emissary. And there's a lot of Christians out there, like, we are called to do things, and sometimes we kind of push away from what God wants us to do, and then we begrudgingly start doing it, and finally we come around to, this is what God's called me to do in his kingdom, and I have to submit to it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I'd never seen that before. Thank you.
Thinking about Cisco and his journey toward being, from being this officer of the Federation to moving into this more vast territory and accepting his role, it reminds me of one of these old Western movies, right? Where, you've often got the soldier or whomever who all of a sudden comes into contact with an indigenous population and then says, oh, hey, there are things to be valued in your culture. There are things spiritually that may actually offer me a spiritual awakening as well. So let's talk a little bit about Sisko's religious awakening. How would you further unpack that journey of awakening for him?
Well, it's one of the best parts of the series, and he hates it at the very beginning. He doesn't want this responsibility. Once again, he just wants to settle down somewhere for a little bit, out of the way station no one cares about, and suddenly a lot of people care about where he's at. And only that, not only Starfleet, but also the entire planet he's orbiting around.
Hmm.
And he doesn't want that. He doesn't want to be their emissary. And yet, as he grows throughout the show, he starts accepting a little more. Maybe, okay, maybe these prophets, there's something about them, or maybe, I can perform a Bajoran wedding for these people. I can offer blessings, to these children as they pass me by, hang out with them and talk about their religion with them. And maybe I might even settle on Bajor when I'm having my new family. I just got married. After this war is over, that's what I'm going to do. And then when we get to season 7, like that image I took from is like the orb itself of the emissary. I would argue that's when he takes not 100% of the way there, but most of the way there to this is who I am. I am the emissary, and I'm going to do what's best for the people of Bajor, even if it means that I don't exist on its plane of existence anymore.
Mm. Yeah. Go ahead.
I also think it's a rather interesting in how we have that awkward meeting between him and Picard at the very beginning of the first episode. And other than the fact that he kind of has bad feelings about Picard because of the battle at Wolf, what was the numbers again?
Wolf 359.
With 359, he's really in a strong agreement with Picard. He just hates Picard at that point. And now, as his role becomes what his role did become, he not only has to diverge between his belief and what the Starfleet beliefs are, he actually has to kind of stand against them because they're not very happy with him taking a religious position over the Bajoran people when they, still kind of true to the Next Generation era, are rather against religion as a whole. I mean, they tolerate it, but they're against it.
What I think is really cool about Sisko is this mystical journey he's on. And even when I think about Christian theology, Christian mysticism seems to be something that's put over to the side. Like, we often like to treat theology as something that is, well, systematic, and it's like you're laying railroad track here. One thing builds on the other, builds on the other, and then so if you use that railroad track image covering the countryside, what mysticism does is it says, let's look at all the other terrain. Let's look at the mountains. Let's look at the rivers. Let's look at all of this nature around it. That is the vastness that we've been invited into. And this journey is one that it expands. And this is what we see in Sisko across seasons, is this him entering into this vastness and accepting it. I think of it as a mystical journey. Okay, so big question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we've also got Kira's acceptance of him as the emissary. I mean, for the first couple seasons, they are not friends.
No,
like they work with each other, but when she finally admits to him, I have a hard time looking at you as anything but like a Starfleet officer, because if I have to look at you as the emissary, things have to change. I butchered whatever she said, but you get the point, is that something has to give in that scenario if you are who the prophets say you are. And then her actually learning more about him, the two of them actually becoming friends, is a part of that religious journey as well, of prophet and follower.
Well, moving into the vastness has got to mean that walls must become bridges, right? And And so it's really cool to see that journey in between those characters. And in so many ways, as we talk about religion in DS9 and understanding and coming to an appreciation of one another, walls have to become bridges. I love that. Y'all need wormhole Jesus. All right, so big question here. Is Cisco Space Jesus?
I'm the one who put the meme on there. For those of you not on YouTube, that's up. No is my answer. No, yes, in the sense of like a character archetype, maybe, but not in the sense of like being Jesus in space. Right. Because, compared to Cisco, Jesus submits. Jesus goes out to do the work of God in the world, to bring forth the kingdom. Garden of Gethsemane says, take this cup of suffering from me. Yeah, that's because I don't want to suffer, but your will be done. Cisco is no, maybe, maybe.
Fine.
Yes, fine.
I'm going to have to agree with you. And even going further, not only is he not like a wormhole Jesus, but his role as the emissary was not as a sacrifice the same way that Christ was. Like, Christ died and rose again because he had to pay the cost for our sins. He had to fix what we messed up. And the emissary of the Bajoran faith did not fill that role at all.
Yeah.
I mean, he's Space Elijah at best.
I accept.
I'm just picturing now that's told to sleep and eat, and you'll feel better in the morning.
But now that Space Elijah has come, maybe we can get Space Jesus.
That's awesome. I love that. Space Elijah. Well, because he's been likened to a Christ figure, not necessarily Space Jesus proper, but Christ figure, even in this funky thing related to him. I was trying to remember this. He's got this funky thing related to his birth, right? Like the prophet.
Yes.
And it's just this, it's not exactly a virgin birth. I don't even, what would you call it? A reverse virgin? But what is that?
I mean, deception. This poor woman. And his poor dad too. Probably fell in love, and she was just taken over by an alien being she had no context for, and then suddenly she's given birth to a son, and with a man she doesn't know, and no wonder she left, and no wonder his dad didn't want to talk about it. It's a huge, terrible thing. It's not a virgin birth, but it's a miraculous, deific almost way of conceiving a child through alternative means, and that a prophet had to take over a human woman for this to happen. But yeah, it's definitely not the same.
That reminds me a lot of the Greek mythology and all the demigods that came from that. Very different than a virgin birth.
Okay.
Not exactly miraculous either. It's really just, hey, we're going to make a child.
So Cisco is Space Percy Jackson.
Okay, I can get behind that one a little more.
something more like that, a demigod of sorts. Mm-hmm. But you have all these things. You do have this divine kind of conception. You've got issues around his son and what sacrifice might look like. There's a little bit more like Abraham there. You've got him communing with these gods or these prophets, kind of like Moses. There are these inflections, perhaps, of various different spiritual characters or archetypes that we could think of, not only in the Abrahamic family of religions, but also, as we've noted, in the kind of Greco-Roman formulations as well. Certainly related to his birth, it was really quite a bit more messy, like the Greco-Roman stuff there. I absolutely agree. So let's take a little bit of time. We've mentioned religions that move beyond this Bajoran conversation. Let's talk about some of the others. What are your favorite religious conversations, be them Ferengi, Klingon, and why? Let's explore some of those just a little bit more.
I love the Ferengi so much. Most of their episodes are gold, most of them, but to see like an entire culture based off of greed in a very uber capitalist society, like the religion itself dictates what you do here. And you got the rules of acquisition, which is like their holy scripture, and that was assembled over time. And you have all these rules within them. I mean, literally the rules of acquisition based on profit. And if you are not doing this, you don't get to go to the divine treasury, or maybe you do, but you're in a lesser position. And that fuels every decision that they make. I just find that so fascinating. And like a culture like that, I don't know if they'd even be able to exist for a very long amount of time. But for the sake of, yes, for Star Trek, yes, they're around. It's the especially the comparisons between the Roddenberry. We don't need money anymore. In the Federation, even though no such system would ever exist in this world. But you know what? That's fine. For the sake of Star Trek, I'll move forward from that. And the contrast between the two of Quark like seeking profit versus the Federation, like we're just trying to help people, and then Rom joining more the Federation side of things, and Nog actually becoming instead of rejecting Ferengi society as a whole, which means he's rejecting their afterlife in a sense to become a Starfleet officer. It's just as they grow to Ferengi from these one note nobodies at the very beginning of Star Trek Next Generation, where they tried to make them their Klingons and failed utterly, to this fleshed out culture like DS9, like can't be beat in that regard.
That's so cool. And I hadn't thought about it until you said this, but the Ferengi really are the prosperity gospel folks of Star Trek. This never occurred to me, but that's
health and wealth.
I forget, what was it that they dealt with? It was like the flow of life, or it was the flow of something where there's always a need for something, but you just have to find what you need to sell at a certain place, or a certain place to sell what you have.
Yeah.
And that was almost like how they were doing their worship, and it was led by the rules of acquisition.
Yeah.
I do think that Deep Space Nine did ruin the Ferengi in the end, when they basically changed their entire structure, with Nog becoming the Grand Nagus and changing everything up. Like, how are they going to be this entertaining race in the future? They ruined the Ferengi.
How dare they reform themselves, Herbie says.
Well, and
they had one job and they can't do it anymore.
I mean, really, that is it. Like you have to also think about what comes after this series. And have we seen Ferengi since Deep Space Nine?
Picard.
Well, so
Quark's restaurant.
Yes. So when you think about things like Picard, or even you think about Discovery. I know Discovery may not be everyone's favorite cup of tea, but I'm trying to think. I feel like I've seen a Ferengi like in the distance. In
when they
Discovery.
go to the future.
When they go to the future, yeah, around the kind of council table for the reduced Federation. I think I've seen a Ferengi, but just seen. There's not been any kind of exploration of who these folks are on into the future. Yeah, I do think I agree. They kind of ruined it, and maybe they wanted to.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I go to therapy weekly to try and forget that Discovery exists. I'd rather watch Star Trek V on an endless loop than ever admit that Discovery exists.
Wow, that is harsh. But I'm seeing some nods of agreement.
Maybe. I haven't seen enough Discovery to make that call.
Yeah. Well, we may have to talk
Also,
discovery.
one
Another day.
more part of worship in Deep Space Nine I don't think we really hit yet, with the changelings and how they had
Founders.
created,
Yes.
but their fighting force, I think it was the Jem'Hadar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jim Hadar
They
and Vorta.
they literally worshipped the founder. They were called the founders, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
And it's like, I would rather see them be reformed, because the Jem'Hadar were actually very entertaining, as well as their leaders. I can't remember their leaders. You did just mention her name, but like, that culture deserves to be reformed to be something outside of just the servants of the founders.
Mhm.
And that's a huge part of Odo's journey too. Is like, wrestling with, these people say that I'm a god by the very fact that I exist. Like, am I? Is that real? Is this manufactured God actually a god? Because that's exactly what the changelings did. That's exactly what the founders did. Is because of being afraid of being hurt, they took over other races. They created the Vorta. They created the Jem'Hadar. So in a sense, they have created life, and that life looks up to them. Like, does that inherently make them a god?
Mm. Wow. Well, then going back to this whole conversation around Gene Roddenberry's vision, when you see the founders appear in Picard, they are, you you're somebody's God is now being experimented on, is being co-opted by the Borg, is something very different than we see in DS9.
Yes.
Hmm. All right. Any other? I mean, we talked about the Klingons a bit already, but any other fun religious moments in DS9?
I mean, I think those are the main ones, really. Obviously the Bajorans are the focal point, but we do get to explore Klingon religion some in the Worf Dax relationship, and all of that lead up to their marriage, which is when we find out that the Klingons killed their gods, and that whole thing. And then the Ferengi, the rules of acquisition. Literally, you don't follow them, you essentially cannot function in their society. You lose your status. You can't have a business. If you do bad enough, you can't even work for another business. You're a nothing. And then the goal is to have enough money that you can buy your way into the divine treasury, because they have to buy their way into their afterlife. So
Indulgences right there, live and in effect in the Ferengi common life.
You also brought up the Dax situation, where they also had to deal with the symbiont or the symbiotes, and how that actually was also kind of a way of worship.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also that one episode. I'm trying to remember the species name. I think it's the Screens, the one where they have trouble with the universal translator at first, and they find that they're religious kind of refugees fleeing from the Dominion, and they found the wormhole, which is like part of their prophecy, maybe, and the world that they're going to be at, the very matriarchal society. It's like, oh, where we end up here, that should be our new home that's been prophesied about before. And how it talks about, like, can prophecies be misinterpreted? Absolutely, yes. And how do you handle that when an entire people group thinks that this is where they're supposed to be? It's a very one-off episode. I don't think they ever get brought up again, but I think for the most part that was really well handled.
Yeah, those are the ones that they convinced to live on Bajor 4 or whatever one of the other planets is, right?
Yeah, they try and settle on Bajor, but they're forced at the end to move to a different planet.
Yeah.
And the woman who kind of becomes, their prophet, who led them through the wormhole, is just forcibly put into a position that maybe other prophets in the Bible, you can look at, God selects them for that, but she falsely assumes, and they all falsely assume, that she is a prophet because of what happens. And there's a whole thing of, well, sorry, by the way, this whole planet is already suffering. We can't bring all these millions of people here. this ain't the place you're supposed to go. Check out this place instead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or there's the
I don't mind the prophecy about the wormhole being, where they were trying to get the relay across, and there was this prophecy that something was going to happen, and then it would be burned wide open. But what happened is this comet, which was going to damage the wormhole slightly, rather than destroying it, it kept it to a point where it was open just long enough, or just enough all the time, so that communications could go through where they couldn't do it before. But all the Bajorans were thinking, this is going to destroy our wormhole. This is going to destroy the only thing we have and our only communication with our gods.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was thinking,
yeah, go.
One other thing I was thinking of, and I don't remember if the race ever gets named, but I call them the Proto-Hirogen.
Oh, the
at the
not
Tosk.
the Tosk, the ones that are fighting them.
Yeah.
Or hunting them. Yeah.
Because that's there was a religious element to all of that too. Like the hunt was their religion. And he was
they genetically engineered them too.
And he was the prey, like he was this revered, honored, like you are our honored prey. It was this. There is a religious element to that as well.
Yeah. I love the show.
I'm trying to remember. There's who said this quote. It was years ago. I was reading, but they said that to live is to be religious, and I think you see that here in DS9 with the various races, species that we encounter. That to live is to be religious in all of these societies and the way they function and interact. There is a religious component to their life. So whether you want to think about it as religion proper or a guiding philosophy, like religion is present.
Well, faith is required.
Faith is present. Yeah.
Faith is a requirement for life without omniscience. Every time you turn your car key, you have faith that your car's still going to do what it's supposed to do and start.
Right.
That you are putting faith in your mechanic, that they did good work. You can go down the line as far as how far the faith goes, but without omniscience, everything you do is an act of faith because you do not know how that thing's going to turn out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so let's talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about using DS9 as a starting point, but just kind of opening the door up to the broader Star Trek universe. Does Star Trek exist on this continuum between agnostic and atheist, or would you broaden that somehow?
I mean, honestly, my answer would depend on who's writing it.
You can definitely tell there were different writers at different points. Like you can also tell that Deep Space Nine is post Roddenberry, and that's why they're able to get a lot more of the religious aspects into it. And even within Deep Space Nine, you can kind of get a different feel of the different writers. And this is totally different, written by a different person in that episode or that season.
Yeah.
So it really, as you said, it depends on the writers a lot.
I mean, I would argue right now we're more atheistic writing in certain respects. I would go around the time of DS9 and Voyager, I'd say more agnostic, and I would say at the time of original Trek, a little more favorable towards belief. And we've got the followers of the sun and stuff like that, and the rejection of other gods. Like we had the image of, what was it, Apollo earlier? It's like, they don't fit within this Christian framework. And then of course with TNG, love TNG. It's atheist to the full. Everything else, you wouldn't believe in those foolish superstitions. I had that image up of the Who Watches the Watchers episode earlier. That's one of the. I roll my eyes and say, "Next episode, please."
Yeah. Well, I guess. Oh gosh, who was it? I was watching a video. I don't remember who it was by or whatever. If we make a distinction between what can be called like positive atheism or negative atheism, or more of like an agnostic atheism. I would put Star Trek in that category. So one, what you would call, these are atheists that make a positive claim there is no God. Right? It's the belief there is no God. Whereas an agnostic atheist or a negative atheist simply says there's no proof there is a God. So it's not a declaration there's no God, which is a positive statement that requires proof. So I don't know that. I mean, TNG comes really, really close, but I don't know that anywhere in Star Trek there has been a positive affirmation there is no God or gods.
And even when they do make something of a positive affirmation to where this could be considered a god, they always portray that thing that they're describing as very negative, such as the Q continuum.
Right.
I would argue that, we're narrowing very far into the scale if you're looking between agnostic and atheistic, where the wider scale is you have theistic to atheistic, and we're constantly drilling down. You definitely can see which side of this spectrum Star Trek really is on.
Yeah.
When you think about things like Next Generation, I heard someone, a rabbi once say that universalism has marched hand in hand with imperialism. And, I want to chew on that a little bit more, but you do kind of have this, and it doesn't necessarily need to be universalism from a properly religious standpoint, but there is a kind of a universalism that is present, I think, in Star Trek: The Next Generation. I mean, it's this whole idea of an enlightened state of being that has become the universal faith of folks. Roddenberry didn't enjoy tension. Even the Star Trek: The Next Generation characters we'll talk about, he never wanted there to be tension, real tension, lasting tension among the bridge crew. That's not what he wanted to see. And
such bad television.
Yeah, well, that's right. and so, but it creates this version of the Federation that, look, all right, y'all, everybody's got to fall in line. Everybody's got to get along. And, does that not have certain kinds of imperialistic tendencies to it? Not meaning to, not intentionally.
Right.
But it seems to.
Well, it definitely shows that Roddenberry did not believe in the depravity of man. Did not believe that we are in need of a savior.
No.
But there's a lot of things that he didn't agree with that we would agree on here.
Yeah.
Right. Roddenberry was not a total depravity guy. You're right. You're exactly right.
I mean, he honestly really believed that mankind could find a way to where we're all at peace and we're all in a good nature, which is definitely not the depravity of man.
Right. Yeah.
Naive but hopeful. It's like to be good to the man, because those are good things to want to have, is kinship between different peoples, to love one another, to not have to worry about eating or what you own or anything like that. That's good, but it's also very naive in the sense of when you actually look at the state of the soul, something needs to be done, and it's not going to be done by human hands.
Right. This belief that if you remove certain kinds of human wants, want for food, want for economic security, if you take some of these things out of the equation in the hierarchy of needs, then all of a sudden you won't need God anymore. You won't need religion anymore. It seems to be what Roddenberry thought might be the case, and so it created a world where that was true.
If you no longer have needs to call out to a God for,
right,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So last question here before we turn to a couple of other things. How well do you think DS9 did in helping us think about integrating science and faith? Just rapid round here. How well do you think they did?
I think for the most part, they do it amazingly. I mean, even we were talking earlier about the conflict between the Bajorans and Keiko over like the scientific understanding and stuff like that. At the end of the day, like Keiko wasn't trying to say your religion is wrong. This is just, hey, here's what I look at when I look at science. This is what that tells me. I think they played that off fairly well.
Yeah.
And then of course you've got Cisco at the very end making the play to become full emissary, but also not denying the Starfleet part of himself. I mean, you could argue, 100% emissary, 100% man at that part, if you really want to get into the wormhole Jesus of it all. But it, he's not denying all the science about it. Yeah, probably the prophets are some higher beings up there, but I have a role right now towards the Bajoran people. And as part of that religious role, I'm going to make the sacrifice play without him coming all across these 7 seasons of journeying between how do I handle being the emissary? How do I handle this faith the people have in me, as well as my own beliefs here in science and reason and all this? That doesn't happen. We don't have Cisco making the final plunge there with Ducat and the fire caves of blah blah blah.
I also agree. It did a really good job. I think it did a especially good job considering it was working within a framework where it had not been handled very well, and they're having to react to the almost like proselytization of atheism of the next generation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, as I said earlier, I think it's really encapsulated well just in the character of Cisco.
Right.
As he has to, navigate like both those sides of himself, but also navigate between the two societies that he's become a part of. And we do. It's done. It's done very well.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, just the needle was threaded well. Just you could deviate even slightly one way or the other from how they handled it, and it would be a bad take.
Right. Well, and I think it opens up the way for other series. I mean, even think about the more current series, Foundation, and allowing sci-fi series to explore this idea between the sci-fi world and certain concepts of faith, and that you don't have to separate science and faith as a people. All right, friends, let's begin to wrap up here. So before we go, I want everybody to go around and give one recommendation. One recommendation. It could be a comic. It could be a game. What would you commend to our listeners?
Wildly off topic, but I just found the first 3 seasons of Archer on DVD for $1 a piece, and I love that show immensely. I have not caught up to everything that happened after like the coma stuff, but if you're in the mood for a certain type of humor at times, Archer's the way to go.
Excellent. What else would you commend?
Well, I'll recommend Go Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. It's an older show at this point, but you really can't go wrong watching that.
Gonna go a different route here. Let me grab something real quick.
All right.
All right. Suspense. Where's it going? Deep into the dwelling of the Winter household. Oh,
So I have over the past couple years been both participating in and leading small groups around this material. and it is fantastic.
Oh.
So this really gets into the introspection and knowing yourself to know God, and not being busy at being busy, and actually being deliberate to make God a priority and all of those sorts of things. And it has been life-changing material.
And what's the name of the book for the podcast listeners?
So this one is the one that the group is revolved around. It's called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. That's part one of the group. And then in the spring, we do Emotionally Healthy Relationships, which is essentially the living it out in others. And they're based on a book he wrote first, which was called Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, but that's just a book you can read. It doesn't have any coursework or small groups or anything like that around it. So if you want to just read one, that's the one to read, Emotionally Healthy Discipleship.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to end as I began and say, look, go watch Rings of Power. It's not bad. It's kind of fun. So that's my recommendation for everyone. To all of our listeners, please go ahead and rate and review the show again on Podchaser, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, anywhere you find us. Share this with others. And I want to thank you to my co-hosts today, Christian, Herbie, Matthew. Y'all are awesome. Thanks for being with me today.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for having us.
And